Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the special City Council meeting of June 1st, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask Captain Williams to lead us in the pledge.
Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Captain. Jennifer, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Bogue.
Here.
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaver.
Here.
Mayor Avila.
Here. Moving on, Ray, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Staff has no changes to the agenda today, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, very well. This is our time for public comment. If there are any speakers, the city clerk will give me a speaker slip, and speaker slips are available at the entrance of the chamber room. Please, when you step up, give your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes to speak on any subject that's not on the agenda. I do not have any in my hand. Do you have any available?
No, sir.
Okay. No speakers. We'll move on to department reports. First one is Megan Wolf, Five Winds Country Music Festival.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. We are 3 weeks away from the city's first ever ticketed festival. On January 24th, City Council approved a change in festival date from March 25th and 26th to June 24th and 25th in order to finalize headline entertainment. This evening, I'd like to provide an update on the entertainment. Friday's entertainment will include Daniel Bonte and Bonafide, J.T. Harker, J.T. Priest, and headline entertainment by Frankie Ballard. Saturday's entertainment will include Austin Law, Scotty Mac Band, Honey Country, Westward Sons, and headline entertainment by Granger Smith featuring Earl Dibbles Jr. After headline entertainment was secured, the name of the festival changed from Kick the Dust Up to Five Winds Country Music Festival. This was due to the artist that sings Kick the Dust Up. In order to make sure there were no litigation problems, we reached out to that artist's team, and they felt like it was best that we steered away from the name Kick the Dust Up. The festival will include 9 live bands, 6 food vendors, 2 bars, which will serve beer, wine, and seltzers, activities such as mechanical bull riding, axe throwing, line dancing, and more. In addition, the festival will include dry camping. There will be a total of 110 camping spaces. And if you look at the screen, there's a map that shows the camping spaces, the venue, and the parking. Tickets for this festival went on sale on Friday, April 15th, and camping spaces sold out in 24 hours. Last weekend, we put 40 additional camping spaces available online, and there are a few left for purchase. Campgrounds will open for load-in on Thursday, June 23rd from 1 to 8 p.m. and on Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Staff has secured a partnership with Odyssey, which is the second largest radio company in the United States. Odyssey is the parent company of K-Frog, and you will begin hearing the advertisement for the event on K-Frog. You will already see that K-Frog is sharing the event on their social media pages and doing special giveaways for the event. Staff will continue to market the event on social media, the city website, the YPAC website, and on the billboard located off the 10 freeway. Staff has met with the adjacent neighbors and will be sending out a letter in the mail to all neighbors within a 1-mile radius letting them know about the event. The estimated cost for the event is $250,000, which with $200,000 of revenue for a net cost to the general fund of $50,000. In addition, there are in-kind services provided by police, fire, and public works. This concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time. Oh, wait, I actually forgot to ask council to approve a Five Winds Country Music Festival expenditure in the budget in the amount of $250,000 and a revenue budget in the amount of $200,000, and receive and file the Five Winds Country Music Festival update.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff?
This 250, that's just amended? I know we
It's-
already, this is the 250 we've already talked about.
Yes, it's formality to put it as a recommendation in a previous council report. It was in the fiscal impact portion. And just to be overly cautious, we'd
It's
like
not
to
in
add it
addition
as a
to.
recommendation.
So it's not in addition to?
It is not.
Okay.
Okay, does anyone have any questions with respect to the receive and file of the Five Winds Country Music Festival update? Hearing none, that will go ahead and receive and file that. Do I hear a motion to approve item number 1?
So moved. I'll second.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it passes. Thank you. Congratulations. Moving on to item number 2, Yucaipa Equestrian Arena Committee Overnight Camping. Again, Megan Wolf.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you again for the introduction. This evening, staff is recommending that City Council waive the provisions of the Yucaipa Municipal Code, Section 12.06.030A and D, regarding overnight camping at the Yucaipa Equestrian Arena from June 25th, 2022 to June 26th, 2022 for the California State Horsemanship Association. The Equestrian Arena Committee is requesting permission to allow overnight camping at the arena so that the Horsemanship Association can tend to their animals. And YEAC has an agreement with the city that allows them to utilize the facility for events such as these. This concludes my report. There's no fiscal impact as a result of this item, and I can answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I'll move approval.
We have a motion to approve
I'll second.
and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Very good. Moving on to item number, this is adjourn to City Council and convene successor agency. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, ask the successor agency Chairperson Bogue to open up.
Am I the, okay. We will.
It says here in my
Well,
cheat
I guess I am the chair. We'll now open the successor agency, and our first item of business is SA1, which is the meeting minutes of December 13th, 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, so I will close the successor agency.
And at this time, I'll ask the Housing Authority Chairperson, Mr. Duncan, to open the Housing Authority.
Am I the chair? At this time, then I'll go ahead and convene the Housing Authority. We have one item on the agenda, the HA1, approval of Housing Authority minutes of December 13th, 2021. Have a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
First and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
So
With
just,
that, I'll go ahead.
just for the record, then the Housing Authority would stay in session, reopen the City
And
Council.
like to open up the City Council and the successor agency at this time. Okay, so we're reconvening. Could
So
you-
I'll open the, what am I, successor?
Successor
Successor agency, yeah.
Okay, I believe it's now for the 22-23 draft budget summary, items 1 through 2, and the presenter will be Andrew Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Before you tonight, this afternoon, is the draft budget for fiscal year 2023. Just a few quick comments regarding the budget is that it's a responsible budget, draft budget. As you know, there's some historic current structural imbalances, specifically in the paramedic fund, as the staff report contains. And also, number 3, it's a healthy, this draft budget contains a healthy fund balance in the general fund. So with that, you can see this table is just a summary of the draft budget. Some of the revenues, you can see the amounts, 34.4 million. That includes 2 million of ARPA revenue. And the bottom line is that it's a balanced budget. So if we look now at the general fund revenues in the draft budget, fiscal 23, just as a introduction to this slide and the next, the first 3 amounts, those columns, the bar graph, are actual amounts for fiscal 19, 20, and 21. In fiscal 22, that's the projected, and then the fiscal 23 is the draft budget. So you can see what those 5 represent. You can see the actual amounts along with the projected amounts, see an increase, generally increasing revenues. In the current year, that fiscal 23 proposed or draft budget, increases in property tax equal about $900,000. As I mentioned, ARPA revenue is approximately $2 million. Sales tax revenue, if you compare that to the fiscal 20 actual, there was $3.8 million in sales tax in fiscal 20. However, in fiscal 23, it's risen dramatically up to about $5.1 million. And in addition, building and safety revenue is up about $250,000. So as we move to the general fund expenditures, again, the first 3 bars represent actuals for fiscal 19 to fiscal 22. 21. Fiscal 22 is the projected amount, and fiscal 23 is the draft budget. In fiscal 23, there are no new additions that are proposed in these numbers. If you recall back to fiscal 22, that's when the 6 frozen positions were added back, approved by the council. At the current time in fiscal 22, there are numerous open positions, and some of those frozen positions were not filled until midway or at some time during fiscal 22. So in addition, there's sheriff open positions that are currently open. The fiscal 23 budget contains approximately $830,000 of contract and department increases for public safety. One-time expenses in the fiscal 23 budget include $530,000 in Munis implementation costs. Current year to date in fiscal 22 is about $265,000. And building and safety expenditures are up approximately $122,000. This is just a few highlights of the fiscal 23 budget. If you recall, the emergency contingency was at 20%, but this budget has that back up to 30%. The reserve of $1 million for the economic stabilization remains the same as the prior year. And like I mentioned, the increases in public safety are approximately $830,000. In addition, there's an additional 3.5% of staffing costs. The transfers in and transfers out are approximately $2 million, a little shy of that. And as I mentioned at the beginning in my opening comments, there's about $853,000 of paramedic a transfer from the general fund. You can see precisely the fire service committed fund balance. So as we talk about fund balance, this slide represents a total of the general fund's fund balance. If you were a corporation, the fund balance would be called equity, just so you know kind of what the for-profit sector would call fund balance. It's equity in the for-profit, fund balance in government. You can see there was a somewhat of an increase between fiscal 19 and fiscal 20. If you recall, in fiscal 21, the city council approved $6 million of prior year net revenues in that year. So that number would be higher, $6 million, if you had not approved that transfer to the capital fund for various capital projects, some of which have been allocated already. And they do require further council approval for those. And if you go from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22 to fiscal 23, it's pretty stable in the fund balance. And this is, again, in total. The succeeding slides here will show the details of each component of the general fund balance. So in this unassigned fund balance, this is the least restrictive of all the classifications of the general fund balance. You can see there was an increase, generally increasing from 19 to 22, those fiscal years. There's a few things going on. Again, like I mentioned in fiscal 21, there would have been a larger amount here, about $6 million. However, the city council, like I discussed previously. In addition, that year, the unassigned fund balance increased because the lack of the contingency going from 30% to 20%. You can see in the difference between fiscal 22 and fiscal 23, there's a reduction, and that's due to the committed fund balance going back up to that 30%. Also in fiscal 21, I also want to mention there were loan repayments of approximately $2.1 million. That increased the unassigned fund balance here for fiscal 21. On this slide is the next least restrictive fund balance. And you can see that this amount in fiscal 21 was eliminated in the future fiscal years. The committed fund balance, as we go down that kind of ladder of, this is now becoming a little bit more restricted. This is the second most restricted that the city has at the current time. You can see, in general, the difference between fiscal 20 and 21, those amounts were related to the emergency contingency reserve going from 30% to 20%, and then it rose back again between fiscals 22 and 23 for that increase from 20 to 30%. And then here, if you start in fiscal 20, this is the non-spendable fund balance. This is the final component of the general fund balance. You can see that the amount of fiscal 20 is generally declining in the succeeding fiscal years. So we do have the recommended action. Before I pass it to the city manager, I just wanted to mention in the staff report, there is a section that discusses the paramedic insurance. And that is an option that the city council is before you tonight. It would provide if some portion of the $850,000 paramedic deficit if insurance was implemented. So that is an item that obviously staff receives your direction on. So with that, I'll pass it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Andrew. If I may, I'll be very brief, but I wanted to clarify one item. The fire fund balance, you didn't see a graph, but I don't think, but that went from 10 million It's in your staff report, the third attachment, from 10 million back in, as of June 30th, 2019, to 9.2 million in, to 8.3 million in estimated June 30th, 2023. And that's, again, a function of the paramedic costs without CPI and the paramedic assessment, as council is very aware, and perhaps the fire insurance approach, which we talked about last year in the goals and objectives, and haven't quite brought that back to council for review yet, would help offset that. Just a quick budget summary, again, clarifying, this is just a budget summary. It's not the full document that you would normally see at this point, but we wanted to get input, if possible, at the budget summary level, and then complete the document, bring it back to you on hopefully June 27th. But we've also left the opportunity for additional study sessions between now and then, if council so chooses. I'd like to talk about that fund balance history in a little more detail, and again, it's that third attachment. And going back to 2019, and we could have certainly gone back further, but going back to 2019, that total actual fund balance as of June 30, 2019, made up of those components that we talked about, was about 49.6 million. And then it's been our history between allocations for larger projects. That number will go up. It went up to 54.9 million. And then as we allocated some funds this past year for a number of projects, that number is 52. And estimated June 30th, 2022, 52.6 or 7 million, and then still at 52.7 million at the end of this fiscal year. This coming fiscal year is the estimate. And that includes, as Andrew mentioned, the 6 million that had already been allocated to non-specific projects, which we'll talk about in the goals and objectives applicable to projects, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, but well, maybe now is the time. So the Treasury guidelines, and our staff, Finance Department staff, participated in a workshop with IRS and Treasury staff to kind of further understand this, allow for cities that are awarded less than $10 million in ARPA funding to simply use those ARPA fundings for lost revenues, to replace lost revenues, without doing the calculations that we talked about last year in terms of what was the trajectory of revenues over the last couple of years, and how does that compare with the current trajectory. What the final Treasury guidelines determined was that which frees up that funding for general government services. If you do use ARPA funding for specific projects, they still have to be water resource projects or other types of eligible projects, but can be used for just simply general government services, police, fire, other general public services. So that's one of the things that has come out of that process over the last few months. That has changed, I guess, over the last few months. And so included in your budget today, or your staff report today, are those of ARPA funding that are eligible or that are just general government services. And I guess in terms of what is the appropriate use of the pass-through fundings, monies that are made available, again, that would be part of the goals and objectives session that follows this item. So if we could defer those conversations, I guess, to the goals and objectives discussion, we'll have a spreadsheet that's set up that we can use to priorities and give staff direction, not necessarily of what council considers priorities for use of that $5 million or any pass-through funds that might be available beyond the budget. So there are several items that are still trending ahead of the revenue trend, if you will, from a purely operational perspective that we are tracking and sharing with council, and with the eye of making getting back to knowing that we have a strong operating budget. And so, as council is aware, There have been some service level options over the last couple of years approved in terms of our sheriff's department contract that have resulted in that trend being, that expense trend being a little higher clip than the revenue trend. Although I will say this year, the sheriff's department contract, even with an additional deputy, was fairly close to our revenue trend. But last year and the year before, last year in particular, not so much. With the fire department, other than the paramedic costs, again, that's going to be an increasing imbalance between the revenues, because the revenues are static and the expenses continue to rise at 5 or 6%. We did add paying for half of the battalion chief beyond the other half that was included before. So those together are, again, trends that are exceeding the revenue trends over the last couple. Keeping an eye on that. As Andrew said, our revenue trends this year were certainly ahead of forecast, but in general over the last, excuse me, we have added just a couple of community services events. You heard about one of them today that probably also fit that category at a lesser level, shall we say. But we are certainly watching those things, and we'll continue to kind of separate those pure operational trends from those funds that might be available for either government services or projects or programs. So with that, I think both of us are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are there any questions or comments for staff?
I do have a request. I have a request that, for the sake of transparency, if we could remove item 1, bullet point 4, which is essential worker stipend. Considering this is a substantially large amount of money, and we are using this money, this ARPA funding, grant funding, to, I guess, give out bonuses, I think this would be something that should be its own item, and it should be put at a regular city council meeting.
Yeah.
And I believe it's $440,000?
Correct.
Right. I think this would be something that probably it should be its own agenda item, and that we could go through and discuss, because it's a lot of money, and we have, as you said, we have a lot of structural deficits with the paramedic tax, that perhaps it could go there, or other opportunities. So that's my request.
All right, any other comments or responses?
What is our unassigned fund balance at this time? I noticed that there was a graph up there of the unassigned fund balance, but I didn't see the number. I couldn't figure it out. It was not, it was like $8 billion, $12 billion?
So if I may, I'll give you a qualified answer. So the estimated unassigned fund balance is, at the end of this fiscal year, is 9.2 million. The current unassigned fund balance is 12.7 million as of June 30th, 2022, right around the corner. The difference primarily is going from 20% to 30% committed fund balance, the additional rainy day fund, $1 million rainy day fund, plus a substantive rainy day fund on top of that, going from 20% to 30%. So most of that difference is is because of that going from 20% to 30%. So it's 12.7 million as of is the estimate as of June 30th, 2022.
And what was Greg's point? I'm not sure I understand what your point was. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you well.
If you look at item number 1, bullet point 4, it says essential worker stipend. If you read the item, it's about $440,000 of ARPA funding. And I think it deserves its own agenda item, is all I ask. So I ask the mayor to entertain my motion.
Was that a motion?
I'll move that we move item number 1, bullet point 4, to a future city council meeting.
All right, have a motion. Is that appropriate?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's fine to give direction to staff.
Okay. So that would be an item. Now, with respect to form and protocol, we have 3 pieces here. We've got city council, successor agency, and the housing authority. Should that be included with the direction and the vote of the city council, or is that a whole, can that be separate?
So the
be
successor,
three separate.
I'm sorry, the successor agency and the housing authority, together with the city council, are conducting that budget summary review. That's a separate line item in terms of the action items that Councilmember Bogue is referring to. Those are purely a city council action item, so.
Okay.
So I don't know that I understand this. So we had talked about this in closed session. Is that appropriate to talk about that now in open session? Or do we keep that in closed session and then talk about this in open session on a different level?
Well, you really can't discuss the content of the closed session meeting. It can only be finally approved, as Mayor, or as Councilmember Bogue mentioned, through a public discussion, a public action item for transparency reasons. It could be a separate item today. It could be heard separately from the rest of the item today. Council could certainly bring it back at a regular meeting if you so choose and act on the other items today. You have those options available to you.
My motion was to move it to a future regular city council meeting, whether it's the next one or the one after that. I'm fine with either or. That's
So-
my motion.
So basically, take it out of closed session and put it into open session to discuss it like we did.
Well, this is an open session item right now. I'm just asking that we defer it to another date so we can discuss it specifically.
It's a separate agenda item, is what he's asking for.
I'll
What do you
second
guys
his
say?
motion to bring it back to council at a future date so that we can discuss it. I think it is important that we discuss it, though. Certainly following the trends of our surrounding communities to ensure that our government stays functioning and for a whole host of reasons, I'm confident we can discuss at the next meeting. I'd like to second his motion.
And as a member of 2 other boards in the county, it's not out of line to put this on a separate agenda item. As a matter of fact, we dealt with that today with Omnitrans, so. We have a first and a second. Do we have any questions or discussion?
I guess it's difficult for me to understand how to go from closed session to open session on this item, because I remember that there was a lot of discussion on this item in closed session, not to bring that up here, and I'm assuming that's why this is on our agenda, because it was something that was in closed session? Yes? No? Maybe?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, perhaps I can help here. So there was labor negotiation materials which were covered in closed session. Those stay in closed session. This is now a discussion of the council. It was put on today's item as far as factoring that into the budget. Councilmember Bogue has just asked that that be put on a future agenda for conversation about that decision, whether to go this direction, put this in the budget for the coming year. It's certainly appropriate to have that in open session, and that's the motion on the table.
I just
Congressman?
really quick, it's, we're talking about $440,000 of grant funding that we're using for something else. I just think it deserves its own agenda item.
And is this something that we can bring up right now? Can we discuss it right now?
Oh, can we move on the motion that's been, that I put out and we have a second?
Okay, we have a first and a second. Basically, you're calling for the vote. All right, so the motion is to call out that agenda item and put it to a future agenda date.
Regular city council.
To a regular city council meeting discussion. Okay, clear as mud, everybody? So, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Who voted yes?
I voted yes.
So it's 3-2. So it's going to go on a future agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Now, do we have to vote on that as Housing Authority and also as the successor agent? No.
No.
'Cause
You
it's
do
open
have,
se-
you do have some other items as a city council to vote on. If you so choose.
All right, I'll move approval on item number one minus the essential worker stipend, and item number 2 of the city council
I'll second.
item.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Do we have any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes carry it. Now, with respect to successor agency and housing authority providing direction, does that vote meet the directions?
I think you're covered, yes. The successor agency and the housing authority were just simply to hear the budget summary today.
Okay,
Now, Mr. Mayor, may I?
yes.
So
yes.
item number 2, I know that we were supposed to provide, I may have jumped the gun on my motion, on my second, but was there a direction we were supposed to provide for insurance in regards to the paramedic? Is that what that
You
that
certainly
item
may.
was?
There was some direction last year, but we haven't progressed, and happy to get direction from city council this year.
Well, what do you guys want to do with that?
I'm not sure I understand what he just said, but
So if you remember last year, we learned of, I guess I'll say it that way, of some cities that had established an insurance slash fee program for paramedic costs, where folks were charged, non-residents and residents were charged for paramedic services. Of course, our paramedic services are now covered by, for residents, about half of the cost with the continuing rise in costs. And obviously, non-residents don't pay a thing for paramedic service. And so the discussion was, should we move forward with that kind of a fee slash insurance program? I think Canyon Lake was the example, where folks have the ability to pay essentially insurance for paramedic services and then are not charged throughout the year for paramedic services. And if not, then they would be charged for those paramedic services, and that would go to their insurance company, typically in today's environment. One of the directions that we received last year from council in this process was to reach out to East Valley Board of Realtors and get their input. And I did attend a East Valley Board of Realtors meeting, and after explaining it to them, at least the folks that were there in attendance at that time understood and even supported the idea. But that's as far as we've gotten this year in this process. And so it certainly is fair to revisit that issue or that item in the budget discussion tonight.
Well, I think,
Go ahead.
I made the second off the motion, so I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make more clarification on, I think Andrew had mentioned something about it.
To the point of clarification, that was the compassionate billing that Chief Malinowski had spoke of regarding going to seek the billing through the insurance, and I think the word he used was compassionate billing. That's what we're talking about, or are you talking about the buy-in program? Or did you reference both just now in your?
Well, it's really two different programs. And I think what Chief Malinowski was talking about is two options. One is compassionate billing that, if the insurance company doesn't pay, then they don't pay. The other is I'll call it the Canyon Lake example, where they allow or they afford folks the opportunity to pay an upfront fee, which is reduced, to cover their potential paramedic response throughout the year. If they don't elect to pay that upfront fee, then they would be charged for the paramedic service that they receive.
Actual costs.
Actual costs.
And the direction that we gave council last time was, again,
Again, we can revisit that, but my recollection was it was to go forward with the Canyon Lake style. But it was
Okay,
a while ago, so I'd have to go back and listen to the tape, quite frankly.
and that's what we need, because
Yeah,
it's.
happy to do
because
that.
We're all
Yeah.
confused here.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you would like, you were suggesting that maybe we just go ahead and ask you to continue exploring the Canyon Lake model.
And that was basically the direction last year. Again, the only progress we've made is having that conversation with East Valley Board of Realtors that was directed. So if you're, as a council, wanting to reiterate that, we'll work on it. And I think we need to rope in the finance folks to help with the estimates and the consulting services. I think that was what was kind of lacking last year we left
So we need more
fire department to
details.
just kind of work on it, and I think we need to help them a little more this year, so.
Is everybody comfortable with that? We'll go ahead and continue with the Canyon Lake model, have them go ahead and move forward with this and come back with a presentation, either through a study session or a recommendation.
Correct.
We good with that? Now, we've already voted on accepting that. Mr. Legal Counsel, do we need to revisit that, or is it just good to go?
I don't think so unless the city manager wants more direction, but I think under item 2, you have just provided direction to staff. And
Okay.
we understand the direction.
All right.
And I would just perhaps ask similarly for Successor and Housing Authority. I think there was the opportunity to provide direction. We didn't hear any, and so I guess there's no.
And that's what I asked earlier, if our city council vote covered that. So apparently not.
Well, I think just there has not been any direction from either of those other entities. If there is, staff would gladly take that. If not, then I think.
Okay, so I'd like to ask the successor agency to open up, reconvene, or is that?
There are, all 3 are still open, so just if there's
Okay.
if there's any direction with respect to housing authority issues or successor agency issues, I would be surprised if there is, but, and if there's not, I think we are concluded.
Mr. Bogue?
Well, first of all, I apologize. I seem to be throwing a lot of mud in the water.
It's okay.
No, I'm fine. It's clear.
Mr. Duncan?
No, I thought, I thought that we had agreed to do the research on that. And I thought I read somewhere in here that we were talking about maybe a fee, some type of a fee. Is that the realtor thing? I thought there was going to be a fee to sort of offset the cost of paramedics in our fee schedule for like what we do for the public.
That's
Did I
where
read
it
that
would end
some-
up. Yes, that's where it would end up. Once we've come to you with a study session, given you information, if the direction is to go forward and establish the fee, that's where it would end up in the overall fee.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Okay, so I guess successor agency and the housing authority have provided the direction. So we're all good.
Are we? Good.
Well, that was a little convoluted, but I think we got where we needed to be.
So do we need to adjourn?
Can I
now?
adjourn the successor agency at this time?
And at this time, I'll go ahead and adjourn the Housing Authority.
Okay, now we're done.
Now it's just us.
Now it's just us, hanging out here on our own. All right, we're going to go to the study session now, and we're going to call up Mr. Casey for goals and objectives. We do have 3 speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is our annual review of goals and objectives that leads into the budget, finishing the budget document and the budget process. So you heard in the budget process, generally, the financial condition of the city, both in terms of the operating budget, also in terms of our overall fund balance. And the idea was to give you that context before we moved into the goals and objectives discussion. Just a reminder that starting off with the discussion, you do have some funding available to you. Again, the ARPA funding has certain restrictions. They're lessened by what I talked about during the budget process, but nevertheless, there are certain restrictions there. As Andrew mentioned, you have allocated $6 million in capital funds for projects at midyear. You've allocated $1 million of that. There's about $5 million left in that funding, for a total of around $10,500,000 altogether. But again, the ARPA funding has certain restrictions on it if you want to use the ARPA funding for certain types of projects. So we listed the next page is the newly proposed, make sure we get on the right page, yeah. Newly proposed or proposed phases or projects. The only newly proposed project on this list is projects, I guess there are several, you could say. Chicken Springs Wash Basin is one, and then the heavy maintenance project, which you saw a list of there as well, which is the second to the last one, general public facility, heavy maintenance. I'll go through these one at a time if you like. Some of you have provided rankings. You see those up there. This is an Excel spreadsheet that we can manipulate with your changes or new information from those of you that weren't able to provide the rankings. And so we'll go through that process today at your discretion. But in order to further understand the new projects or new phases, and I also want to point out there are two that aren't on this list that I'll talk about as well. One of
Ray,
them-
before you go further, I need to announce that I cannot participate. Is this the one I can't
Yes,
see
the second page we haven't got to yet.
Okay, I'm sorry. So,
So I'll separate these out, so.
Okay.
Okay. So on the first page, the one item that's not on this list is enhanced pickleball funding or partnerships. And then we've had some very, very recent conversations. If council recalls, we had these same conversations 4 or 5 years ago for budgetary reasons for the district and leaders. Those conversations came to a stall point, but there's been some discussion about school resource officer to jointly fund it as well. So we can talk about that today. Again, the intent isn't to establish amounts today. We'll come back to you with the budget process based on your priorities today and your input today with actual amounts requested. And it certainly may be less than the total amount that I referenced at the beginning. So the first line item is infrastructure to support economic development / affordable housing. And I wanted to point out on this one, Ben, do you have those spreadsheets? Thank you. So why are these both referenced together? Well, there are a number of opportunities in the community where you have the ability to provide infrastructure or support, or in some cases gap funding, but in some cases infrastructure or support, financial support for projects that would benefit both affordable housing, I'm sorry, get a little closer here, both affordable housing projects and commercial development, economic development in the form of commercial development or other market rate housing. An example of that I'm not specifically promoting today, but we certainly talked about this at mid-year. An example of that is providing utilities and transportation improvements, for example, to the south side of the interchange along Live Oak that would support commercial development, but there are also affordable housing projects next to that commercial development at that location. And so there was some interest in doing infrastructure to support that at mid-year. Another example that is still out there today more actively is projects along Oak Glen Road near the Dunlap Park and the city-owned property across the street from that, and then the property next to that property. And all of those require utilities, all of those require some additional infrastructure in the form of grading and that sort of thing. And so don't have a specific line item in mind, but in terms of support for projects, whether they're economic development in that area. Of course, there's a hotel project being proposed. There's other projects in that area, housing projects. The housing projects typically require gap funding, whether it's infrastructure or other sources of funding, and sometimes community development or economic development projects as well. as we saw with the hotel that's under construction today. I can talk more about that later on, but that's kind of an introduction to that line item. Second line item is the city yard, utilities, parking lot. Obviously, that's well under construction. Unfortunately, like so many folks, so many agencies and private folks, we have seen a tremendous increase in costs, material costs, labor costs, and along the way in the phases of that project, and we estimate that it will require $1.5 million to finish that project, somewhere in that range. Library design phase, initial local match. This is one of the reasons why we are here in June instead of in early May or late April. We were told that we might hear by the end of May on the library grant application that we made this year for $10 million. Now that state has moved that timeframe back, I learned today, to summer. And so unfortunately, we won't know before the budget is adopted. And if we were able to get that grant, it is going to require a substantive local match. And again, for the community's benefit, this is intended to be a joint project with the county and the school district, potentially located on school district property. And the county at this point has agreed to contribute all of the, at least the inside requirements, the tenant improvements, the books, the computers, and all of that, all of which is eligible also for part of that local match. So the intention was that local match in the amount of about $2 million would cover our share of the local match for the first few years for that project, but only if we were able to obtain that grant funding. Without that grant funding, this is not something that staff would be recommending just because it's a very cost prohibitive lift. El Dorado Phase 3, as council is aware, we're finishing up Phase 2 in anticipation of the festival that you saw today, the Five Winds Festival that you saw today. The next phase would include getting the overall project ready for the equestrian use, RV/equestrian use for equestrians, just not with hookups or anything, but just dry camping. And the group camping areas, and that requires some additional improvements, but also a commitment that we've made along the way is to have an on-site park ranger there at this point in time as we move into the camping phase after the festival. Dunlap Park Phase 1, this is a project, I don't know if, do you have the concept? This is a project that council has seen a number of years ago. Like with other projects, thank you. Like with other projects where we think that we've got a shot at grant funding, we have historically completed the conceptual plan, started applying for grant funding. In this case, we've completed the final design, the acquisition. We did get grant funding for the property acquisition. We've tried now for 3 years to get grant funding in different avenues. Prop 68 we were unsuccessful with. Member requests didn't quite get there that way. There was another grant application that I'm not remembering. At some point, council has given staff the direction to move forward with the project in phases, even without grant funding. And so the request today is, are you prepared to do that? Not the building, not the area around the building, but the tot lot, the lake area, the landscaping around the lake area. And again, this ties in potentially with the second hotel site that seems to be ready to move forward on based on the deal points that we've all talked about along the way. And so they need dirt. This property will export dirt. And so maybe it's the time to move forward with a phase of this project this fiscal year. Chicken Springs Wash, this is a relatively small basin, small cost too, but it's upstream of the Avenue E road about couple hundred yards, I guess, from Oakland, east of Oakland. There's a wash there that's in our development impact fee program. This is a new project in terms of reducing flooding for those areas that I talked about a minute ago, the housing projects, the downstream hotel project to a certain extent, and the park project to a lesser extent, at a relatively inexpensive cost compared to like the Wilson 3 Basin or the Wildwood Creek Basin or the Oakland Creek Basin. Basically, you dig a hole, do some protection on the downstream side or the upstream side of Avenue E, and put a small pipe underneath the existing box culvert. It's not horribly undersized. It's just the design criteria changed between when flood control first put that box culvert in and today. And so it is somewhat undersized, but not horribly undersized. So it doesn't take a lot of detention to make it work. General public facility maintenance, unfortunately, the list that was attached to the staff report ended up being so small it's hard to read, but we handed out a larger version in case you had any specific questions on any of these items. I know it's a long list, but there's just a whole host of things that it's just time to start repairing or painting or maintaining that hadn't been repaired or painted or maintained over a number of years. There's also a few vehicles that are on the list, but those are funded through other sources, gas tax or capital outlay. But in terms of the capital projects fund that would come out of that, potentially out of that $5 million that you previously set aside back in January, you've got things like Avenue I basketball and tennis court resurfacing, playground equipment replacement at the community center park, public facility exterior painting, including City Hall, Police Department, Community Center, Fire Station 553, the historic fire station, citywide cameras, the next phase, geofence, the next phase, fiber optic upgrades at certain locations. I won't go through the whole list, but 7th Street Pool, there's some pump repairs, storage repairs, upgrades. And we haven't done a whole lot at 7th Street Pool since we did the rehab shortly after I arrived, I think 2004. Same thing with the Shear Senior Center. Done some work there, more work there at the Shear Senior Center, but there's a little more to be done as well. So I won't get into that list any further unless you have specific questions, but that was the next item. And then we have talked about a new incubator center. We've talked to several folks in the community about locations for a new incubator center. Nothing seems to be falling in place, shall we say. And with the incubator center, we've all talked about some of the tenants that are not as active, shall we say, as some of the early tenants that first arrived when we first started. And so staff is seeking direction on, what the priority level is for a new incubator center. As council is aware, we're moving towards the sale of the existing incubator center. The pickleball funding is one additional item. Maybe we can input that on the screen if you don't mind. So council gave staff direction last year and allocated $400,000 in funding for pickleball facility. The pickleball board committee had suggested, council approved the location at the community park. There was some discussion recently about potentially using the 7th Street facility, but after re-reviewing the issue with pickleball leadership, staff believes that they're still interested in the community park being the priority location, but they are here today to speak to it as well. You have the concept plan for that for me? The concept that was initially done at the community park included a lot of retaining walls. Those kind of drove up the cost. So staff looked at the potential for grading, slope grading in that area rather than all the retaining walls that were in the original concept. The original concept with retaining walls was estimated at something like 800,000, a little over 800,000. Staff believes that we can accomplish quite a bit with grading, and most of the courts that were anticipated initially for, I think, 590,000. And so staff's question on that is, should we move forward with a phase of this? Should we continue to work with pickleball? We've tried to go after grant funding, talked to some folks about grant funding. Because it's so new, it hasn't lent itself well to fitting into any of the older state programs or federal programs at this point, but be happy to continue to work with Diane and the rest of the leadership on going after potential grant funding to cover the additional cost of that. The last item is whether council wishes staff to pursue a joint effort with the school district and the leaders for an additional school resource officer, which I would guess if that's going to be prioritized, you may want to not discuss that one. And then on the second page, we just have had some staffing type requests that I wanted to make sure, let's see if I can get to it here. Here it is, that I want to make sure that the majority of council prioritizes as well. I'll go through these in short detail. Number one, a detailed review of the Chamber City agreement, the history of that agreement, and you know, how that has evolved over the last 5 years or so. The second one is a review of engineering planning deposit records. I'll be right up front with you as we reduce staff and then increase staff in finance department, and got caught up on some things that we got behind on 4 years ago. They prioritized getting the audit report going in the right direction, and both in terms of timing and response from our auditor, getting our bank reconciliations, bond reconciliations, all of those caught up. And so this is now getting caught up, but we got a little behind over the last couple of years. And happy to provide more detail on that if council so chooses. Yucaipa Performing Arts Center. We can certainly come back to you with a detailed report of the financial performance this past year in the Yucaipa Performing Arts Center. That was one of the things that was discussed in individual meetings, or we can include that in the last item. And some of these we can include in the last item, which continuing to do those biennial department review reports. You've heard from Development Services several times. You've heard Community Services. Staff is committed to bringing those back to you several times a year for each of the departments if that is a high priority. And it would include information on some of the other things as well. There was also some communication about volunteer programs. And yes, we've added some additional volunteer type programs over the last several years. And certainly we can come back to council and report on that, the Make a Difference Day, the other tree planting efforts, the bicycle rodeo and things like that. Happy to report on that if council so chooses. Economic development, housing initiatives. This is the facade improvement programs, the resident facade improvement programs, the CDBG programs. Happy to report on that as individually or separately, or as a part of a biannual department report from the city manager's department. Excuse me, again, council's preference. And the last item was a request for challenge coins, if that's something that the council wishes to pursue. Other agencies have done something like that, and council members would have the ability to distribute challenge coins at whatever guidelines or priorities or protocol that council so chooses. So those are the kind of the extra staffing, or I called that one, the last one, other. It's not a lot of staffing. It's just whether that's something that council wishes to pursue. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Happy to respond after your speakers have an opportunity today to further discuss any of the issues, but, did we show the concept plan on the, yeah, we did. So I think you've heard my preliminary staff report and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ray. A little comprehensive there. Before we ask council to score or adjust our scores, I'd like to go ahead and just encourage everybody to ask questions and provide comments, after which we'll ask our speakers to come up, and then we can score or adjust our scores. If you're in agreement with that, that's the way we'll proceed. So do we have any questions?
Comment?
Comments, questions?
Go ahead.
Well, would request on the city yard utilities parking lot landscaping. Can we also add miscellaneous landscaping throughout the city that we haven't finished? We could add that. I know there's areas along Yucaipa Boulevard and.
So happy to do that. Just for clarification, wanted to point out that we do have the landscaping on the median Yucaipa Boulevard in the CIP, but there's a caveat to that. And we also have the landscaping in the parking lot at 13th Street Sports Park in your draft CIP. The caveat to the landscaping on Yucaipa Boulevard is there are some other things that we're interested in working on, and so we've got to balance the cost and the landscaping and the cost and the other things. And you'll hear more about that between now and the budget. But right now, we have the landscaping, the final budget. We have the landscaping in the budget for the median, and we have landscaping in the budget for the 13th Street parking lot.
Does the other things that you talked about there, or that you referenced, does that include the roundabouts?
The other things on Yucaipa Boulevard are basically total cost as it relates to Avenue E, which is now, has been for several years, in the Yucaipa Boulevard widening project, or had been. The intersection improvements at Avenue E and Yucaipa Boulevard, and then the median itself, the landscaping.
Okay, and my concern is like, I have Avenue E and Fifth, and I don't think there's any landscaping. I haven't been there in a while, but
Yeah.
there's no landscaping at those roundabouts.
And those are very close to, and maybe out to bid. They're out to bid, and we're moving forward on those. And just to follow on that, included in your draft CIP, which you heard at the last meeting, is not only the roundabouts on Avenue E at those intersections, but also finishing up both Fifth and Fourth, but also finishing up that last segment of Fifth Street that ties in with that roundabout. So we're also, not only are we doing the landscaping at both of the roundabouts, that's out to bid right now, but we're also doing, finishing the Fifth Street Phase 2 and that roundabout at Fifth Street this fiscal year.
Okay. Mr. Duncan, you have a comment?
It's my opinion that we should just take that incubator thing off the list, because we did that for years, and that turned out to be a waste, in my opinion. I know there was a little bit of good that came from it, but like herding cats, it was just a waste of time, in my opinion. I would make a motion that we just take that off the list and not even consider that anymore. But that's just my opinion.
Mr. Beaver? Any questions or comments? Mr. Thorpe? I have two comments, or two questions. One is, we have the, I can't see that, mountain bike Phase 3.
Yeah, number 8.
Councilman Thorpe, you and I had talked about how possibly ESRI was going to help with the phase finishing up. Is that correct? Is this?
That was a possibility we're pursuing, but there's not been any talks with that yet. I'm waiting for some other information still before I go that route.
Okay, so that's not, actually, we don't have that in the bag then?
No.
We're still waiting for them to make a commitment, and then for us?
I need to get some other details finalized before I approach them on the possibility of them being involved.
Okay, I thought we had that more in the bag, because if that was the case, then there's really no need to put that on the list either, if ESRI was already going to cover that. And
So if I may,
we were
Mr.
just
Mayor.
looking.
I'm
Yes, sir.
sorry, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
I just, That's the challenge of the timing. Like I said earlier, we're getting so close to, the budget deadline. I didn't want to wait any longer to bring the goals and objectives to you. But whether it's a library, there's still the potential for the $4 million state revolving loan fund grant at Wilson 3, and there's still the potential for some help on the mountain bike course. And that's why I think it's most beneficial if we can get input relative to priorities, because we're not sure, just priorities, we're not sure where we're gonna shake out on a couple of these pretty large issues. If the library grant, for example, comes through, the $10 million library grant, we'll need to match that with local match funding. If it doesn't, then that $2 million that I've suggested, plus or minus, can certainly be allocated for something else. So the mountain bike issue, the library issue, and the Wilson 3 Basin issue kind of are all in that category where there's still a major element, different major. That's an $80,000 or $100,000 project. The Wilson 3 is a $16 million project, but in terms of a portion of the funding, it's still a major component. We still don't know answers to those three questions. So we're hopeful that we can get some direction in terms of priority without, focusing too much on the actual amounts.
Okay, thank you. I needed to hear that. Let's see.
Mayor, I have another.
Yes.
Go ahead. You said another.
Oh, yeah, I do have. I agree with Councilmember Duncan. I think I put that priority for the incubator center as 3, and then earlier I talked to you, Ray, and I thought that it started out well, but it fizzled out, and if it wasn't on there, that's fine with me too. I support Mr. Duncan's motion. With that, I have extreme heartburn with this challenge coin thing. I don't think that should be an item that the city council should have to decide to produce. In my world, outside of this, challenge coins are usually produced by unions or individuals supporting or promoting their cause or entity. I would like to see the challenge coin taken off, and of all the things to spend money on, I think this is one of the most frivolous things. With all apologies to everybody here who support this, but I don't think it's not a thing we should be doing right now. When we have a lot of money, then we can spend it, but let's just kind of watch our budget and be more prudent. Finally, I do have to say that I cannot and I will not participate in item number 1 on the extra staffing efforts. I have a conflict of interest with that item. My wife is in the chamber, and I will not vote, nor will I comment. And if there is a discussion, I'll have to excuse myself from this so as to not influence or de-influence anything. All right, with that, we do have 3 speakers, unless, I'm sorry.
Really quick, on item 1, where it's infrastructure to support economic development for affordable housing. I know we sit up here and the state constantly is telling us where we have to put affordable housing, and we argue back and forth and just, not argue, we discuss where it's supposed to go, and for me, that's what I understand, that's what our obligation as a city is, to zone for certain affordable housing projects. By putting a number on this very first one, I don't care if we put number 1 or we could go all the way to number 10. By putting a number on this, I'm still allocating $1 million to pay for the affordable housing project. So are we required to fund these affordable housing projects, or are we required to zone for them?
So if I may, in response, it's a kind of a 2-part answer, Councilmember Bogue. The first part is in response to the question as it relates to the RENA process and the housing element requirement. As it relates to the housing element requirement, it is primarily rezoning property or zoning property, not necessarily rezoning, zoning properly and providing the tools, if you will, to facilitate development pursuant to the housing element. In addition, what we have done historically, although it has been focused on senior housing up to this point, is that we have provided, whether it's gap funding, infrastructure support, combination of the two, property acquisition, much of which is in the form, or the reimbursement is in the form of residual receipts repayment over a period of time. That's true for the 45-unit project on Yucaipa Boulevard. It's less true for the Horizons project on 3rd Street. That was more about deferred fees, less about property acquisition and those sorts of things. The county stepped in on that project with gap funding for that project. At the 5th and County Line Road project that was built a few years ago, that was a project that the city provided the property for, the city provided deferral of fees, provided gap funding in the amount of $350,000.
Ray, can I jump in really quick?
Sure, I'm almost
So-
done, but go ahead.
My question really is this, by us putting a number on here, are we allocating $1 million for the infrastructure costs of an affordable housing project? That's really, I know we've done it in the past, but if I put a 1 or I know you're only gonna go to 3, but no matter what number I put here, I'm allocating $1 million to an affordable housing project.
It is intended to seek council direction. There are other ways for staff to get direction from council about specific projects, and we've had those conversations.
Would it be better that we just come back? For
We can
each
come back, certainly.
Well, not on the goals and objectives, but if a project shows up and we want to allocate money towards that project, we would do it.
That's certainly up to the council,
But this
yes.
one is just, we're allocating $1 million to whatever project that's out there.
Absolutely an
That's
option.
just how I read it.
And
so.
maybe a better way to approach it. I guess my concern was, as is the case with so many things, staff can only go so far in working with somebody on a specific project, but it still may be the best way to do it, before seeking clear direction from council. And so that may be a better way to approach it. If council supports that suggestion, we can delete that from the goals and objectives, come back to you when we have a specific project and evaluate it at that point, and leave funding available that doesn't get allocated for a specific use. I think that may
Right,
be
and
a
it's
better
just more,
approach.
yeah, it's more specific
Yeah,
about what we're, we're just allocating a general
Understood.
$1 million to whatever project shows up. Anyway, that's why I have a problem with it.
Well, I
It's not
gave
specific.
it a 1 because it says economic development, and I'm always for economic development on whatever level we can get sales tax revenue, but it's also / affordable housing. I gave it a 1 because of the infrastructure to support economic development. I didn't have affordable housing in my mind when I gave it a 1. FYI.
And so the reason for that is the example I gave you at the beginning for a project, let's say, hypothetically, that's on the south side of the freeway, and the same utilities that are required for a commercial retail development, or the same transportation improvements that are required for commercial retail development, happen to benefit the affordable housing project next to it. So, you can't separate the two necessarily, but again, that goes back to maybe it's a better approach to just come back to you with a specific project. Then you can evaluate whether you are getting that economic development benefit at the same time you're providing support for an affordable housing project.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, we'll go ahead to our speakers. We have 3 speakers for this item. You have 3 minutes. Please indicate your name, correct my pronunciation if necessary, and give your address. And first out of the gate, Kathy Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I am Kathy Barton. My address is 36876 Oakview Road. I'm also a member of the city's Trails and Open Space Committee. All of these projects are worthy of your consideration. I don't envy you in having to place priorities on them. I am here to speak about Phase 3 of the Wildwood Mountain Bike Trail. I want to thank you for your support of Phases 1 and 2 with funding from you and also a few $1,000s in private donation. Phase 3 is what is next. It would add approximately 3/4 of a mile to make it a total of 2-mile trail over by Wildwood City Park. This is a fairly unique facility in the Inland Empire. To the best of our knowledge, this is only the second mountain bike exclusive facility, the other one being in Sky Forest up in the mountains. So this is another way of making putting Yucaipa on the map among the mountain bike community. And specifically, I'd like to ask your consideration of assigning a high priority to Phase 3. And as City Manager Casey described, this would position this project to be ready to go as funding becomes available, whatever the source of that funding. And in addition to what was discussed this afternoon, I know of at least 2 additional possible grant sources in the coming year that we could go after, and would just pledge bringing my skills and efforts to that fundraising as we go forward with this next phase of this facility. So I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, next speaker is Patty Ingram.
Thank you. Patty Ingram, 9346 Yucaipa Ridge Road, and I'm here to advocate for pickleball. You've seen me here before for this, and I thank the city council and the city staff for working with the pickleball club on the facilities. I think that it's most important for you to know that we would love to have just this awesome facility out at the Yucaipa Community Center, but when we got the first estimates back from the staff, it was not going to work. So we did start looking at, because we thought we had the budget of $400,000, we were trying to keep it in that. So we started looking at other alternatives, and I think there's some things about the program that you should know, because I think it'll help you in determining whether or not this can still remain a high priority for you, because we think it should be. Monday, because it was a holiday, we had 56 players at 7th Street. That'll do 14 courts. We have that kind of turnout on the times when the public in general can come. If you'll recall, our agreement with the city is really just for mornings during the week. That's the times we're able to reserve courts. So we have a pretty limited population that we can serve right now because of the way that is. So to have courts that could be dedicated to pickleball will be a tremendous asset to the city and will really grow the program. We have joined with the city in trying to do community benefits. We've participated in the health fair. We've run youth clinics at the community center. We've run adult clinics at the Avenue I Park. We've done probably more than any other local community pickleball club has done in trying to promote this sport. We did take the opportunity when it looked like the costs at the community center were going to be too high to look at other alternatives with the staff. When we came just before, I think it was in May, when you were going to look at the 7th Street facility, we had some opposition to it because it still was not going to be permanent courts. And I think you should know that there was a way to redo that design to where instead of building, the proposal was to build another cover over the skateboard park. We don't need another cover over the skateboard park. We have a cover over where the existing basketball courts are. You could use all of that money to build new basketball courts, and you would have had the same price as the Phase 1, which would have been I think it was in the $500,000 range, where we could have had dedicated pickleball and 2 new basketball courts, and you were going to remove that theater building. We also looked at, and we haven't run this one by staff, but we looked at the Avenue I Park, trying to convert the tennis courts and basketball courts there. And I know that's taking away other facilities. And so that's the balance that you as the council have to look for. So obviously, a completely new dedicated pickleball facility is more ideal for the community. But for pickleball, The cover is huge in this community with the number of seniors that use it to draw them in. If we have a facility without a cover, the usage is going to still be drawn to the 7th Street courts where we have a cover. I would hope that you are, and I also noticed in your budget that you're already looking at money to resurface Avenue I, so, that's part of the big cost that comes with it. That would already be in there. You have unassigned funds right now what I understand in the area of $10 million to add another $500,000 or so to the pickleball program to build a nice facility up at the community center park would be great. But I think what's important is that we get a decision to get moving forward on something. We are willing to work with any place the city has space for us to have permanent facilities, because we know that we can use this and that we will continue to have an active program in pickleball here. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any of them. And I apologize, it's last minute to find out about this, and I just got back into town, or I'd had more prepared with the costs. Thank you.
Ray?
Just wondering, I don't know if the last speaker is also a pickleball proponent?
I'm pretty sure Diane Smith.
Yeah, if staff would love to know what their preference is, whether it's converting the 7th Street or the community park without all the retaining walls or Avenue Y. I think we can help this along if we understand what the pickleball leadership's priority is. Is that a fair statement?
Diane, do you want to address that, or do you want me to?
Well, thank you. Right now, I'm the guy who says who comes up. Thank you very much. Miss Smith.
Is this mic operational? It's taped down.
Can we drop the mic and maybe move the mic over in front of the
Put the wheelchair right here, and
Yeah.
I'll put this right here. That's community services for you.
Thank you very much. I'm Diane Smith. My address is 12841 Medlar Street, and I am indeed here to support pickleball. It's been over a year since you gave us $400,000, and I had hoped to have the courts built by now, but I didn't realize we were going to run into difficulty with the price of concrete and the companies not having workers, and it's delayed it long enough that it's really doubled in cost. I would really like to have it at the community center if you could just give us more money. The money is the issue. And it has really stalled our children's program that we had hoped to develop. And we still have that dream, and having dedicated the month of April to the kids, we taught them how to play, and then we gave them a tournament. And to see their enthusiasm and excitement just motivated me further to pursue this youth program. Your question was, what are our priorities? I think we have our overriding priority is to get a pickleball program that is all-encompassing, the youth and the adults who work, students, and then the older people. Right now, I would say only the older people are being programmed for. So if there's any extra money, we could build it at Community Park. That is the dream, and that would be ideal. I've made some attempt to raise some extra money, and I called the county, and Supervisor Rao said, check back in 6 months, and maybe they could have a joint project. But right now, they're all tapped out. Right now, the city proposed to install 7 courts, and it would be for the cost of $590. So we would still need extra money just to do the phase 1. And that, like Patty had pointed out, that there's no cover until phase 3. And so those courts probably won't be used during the summer months. And is that light say, okay, I'll stop.
Finish your thought.
Well, my thought was, so if we have the project proposed by the staff, it's a wonderful project, but it's delayed because it's in phases. And the last phase adds the cover, and that's what we really need. So I don't know if the ARPA funds can be looked at for potential in helping us out, or what you could come up with. But I guess that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, this is our time for us to go ahead and prioritize, and we'll go ahead and start with the first page that includes the infrastructure to support economic development. I believe there was a motion by Councilmember Bogue to remove it. And Ray, do you want to do that first, or should we just go ahead and ignore that?
No, if it's your choice, Mr. Mayor, but you can certainly ask for a second and take a vote on removing that. There was also a suggestion to remove the incubator, so.
And the challenge coin.
And the challenge coin. So you may want to take a motion on each of those separately in a second.
Can I motion that we just remove those 3?
Sure.
That's my motion.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No opposition? It passes. We'll go ahead and eliminate those 3. And again, for the record, I will not be scoring or commenting on the issue regarding Chamber of Commerce. So let's see. We'll go ahead and start with, we can start with me, I suppose. I do want to make a change on the bicycle, mountain bike phase, because I thought it was more in the bag and that it was just kind of a no-brainer that we'd get it. I want to move that up to, give it a 2. And then the pickleball, I think we really need to have more conversations and come up with some funding to make this work. We've made promises and we were very enthusiastic in the very beginning. So I want to make that a very high priority. So I want to put a 1 there. I think I'm allowed to put up to 4 1s. And so far, I think everything else stays. Mayor Pro Tem Beaver, do you have anything, or would you like to go first, Bobby? If you have any changes?
I'm already up there, except pickleball, I'll give that a 1. I didn't see that, or maybe I did. I gave you my list today, and I think I had them.
It was added.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
Okay, so you're good with your list?
You want me to go?
Sure.
Okay, so just really quick.
Do you want to go next?
No, did you mention something about an SRO? Is that going to be on here, or are we going to?
I'm sorry?
About the SRO and
I did mention the SRO.
be on here? Or?
That's another one that I think an individual probably has to recuse themselves for.
You can't speak on a portion of it because it's.
Yeah, so maybe we do that and the chamber at the end, if that's okay.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
All right. So the city yard, I have it as a 2. Library 1, El Dorado 2, Dunlop Park 1, Mountain Bike 1, 7th Street 2, Chicken Springs, 2. General Public Facilities is a 2. The Incubator Center is gone. Pickleball, 1. You need the others?
Yeah, that's okay. Well, if it's okay, we can do the second page
Okay.
later and.
Who wants to go next? Justin, you want to go, or John?
So starting with the city yard utilities, I put a 2, library design 2, El Dorado 1, Dunlap Park 2, mountain bike 1, 7th Street Park, I put a 2, Chicken Springs 2, general public facility 2, and then pickleball 1.
Mr. Thorpe?
Okay, so city yards, 2. Library, a 1. El Dorado, 2. Dunlap, 1. Mountain bike, 1. 7th Street, 2. Chicken Springs, 3. General maintenance, 2. Pickleball, 1.
So if I could make a suggestion, Mr. Mayor, maybe the school resource officer makes sense on this list, and a council member would have the opportunity to recuse themselves on this.
I'll step out.
And again,
Just for the record, it's, Councilmember Thorpe can't participate due to his employment with the Sheriff's Department, and this would relate potentially to that contract.
and just a reminder that the proposal, similar to what we've talked about a few years ago, is a shared resource officer for, with the school district and the Leaders Charter School and the city. Participation share, not determined yet. We just began that conversation again that we had 3 or 4 years ago, but wanted to make sure that council considered this, to what extent council considered this a priority.
What was the share the last time?
We never quite got that far. I mean, we talked about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Perhaps that's not quite the right number, but that's what we talked about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, so that equates to what, about $80,000 today's funds?
Pretty close, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
for the city's share.
You can put me down as a 1.
I would also like to add a 1.
Mr. Duncan?
Well, what is that exactly? We already have a resource officer, don't we, at the school?
We have one. This would be adding a second school resource
Second.
officer. That would share it among the different schools and between the district and inland leaders.
I'll give that a 1.
I do too, and I think we should have maybe had a little bit of discussion on our side too, is that with respect to our current events, we probably need to get as many resources out there and available, so also a number 1.
And speaking on that matter, for the public's benefit, if they haven't been watching over the last year, we've come leaps and bounds in adding a patrol response to our city, and that is ultimately what responds to schools should anything from fights up the way to horrible tragedies take place. So we've done that. Now at least in my mind, the thought is presence, adding and a deputy who's dedicated to a school to be there, even when our patrolmen are patrolling this city at large.
And if, as it sits right now, how many do we currently have? School resource officers, just one?
Just one.
Okay. All right. So we're all in agreement, and we can ask Mr. Thorpe to come back in?
I believe so. So just not necessary for the budget process, but it sounds like the pickleball leadership's priority would be to move forward at the community center, community park in phases. And with that, staff is prepared to move forward on that front, as is the case in a number of our large projects. Equestrian Arena is probably the best example. sometimes these phases will take a few years, both in terms of saving money and being able to pay for that next phase. But
Okay.
we'll expedite the construction of phase one, design and construction of phase one as quickly as possible. Without the retaining walls, with the slope grading, less a couple of courts from what was originally anticipated. We'll add those courts later. So just wanted to make sure that we're going in the right direction on that particular item.
I see some head shaking behind you, so I would encourage city and the pickleball representatives to meet and come to a clear understanding, knowing that our pockets are not without limitations.
Thank you.
But I would also, I would also add that, just like the BMX track, I mean, the BMX track is a real draw for the city of Yucaipa, the equestrian center. I know that was done in phases, but we need to find resources for this as fast as we can from the bottom half of that list there. In my opinion, we need to find the resources to build that, because I think if we build that, they will come.
So if I may, in response to that, the BMX is a completely different example in that the city did not contribute much at all to that project. It was almost all volunteer effort and sweat equity, if you will. We did contribute to some of the infrastructure, and we still have funding for the sewer connection when they're ready to do the bathroom, or the restroom. But those folks were amazing in terms of the volunteer effort and going after funding. In terms of the equestrian arena, that was the example that is mostly paid for by the city. There is some reimbursement happening from some of their events, as you know, of late, and that's been helpful in order to help fund not only projects there, but elsewhere in the community. So that's probably more on target, if you will, with the pickleball courts. But I'm with you 100%. Let's get phases going. Staff will meet with the pickleball leadership and get this thing going as quickly as possible. That's our interest as well.
Could it be possible that staff also collaborate with members of our Healthy Yucaipa Committee? I know there's several influential members on there with different medical organizations in the region that might have influence to request funds from some of these large hospitals who got a lot of money from ARPA during this horrible time.
Yep.
They might want to give back to the community, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All righty, going on to the next group.
And this next group, revenue enhancement, was just an idea for where some of the funding might come from. No need to prioritize that, but the next group also has the chamber in terms of goals and objectives having to do with mostly staff time, not so much cost, but more these efforts will require extra staff time over and above the normal course of the day. And so that's the purpose for having these items on the list. And this is one, again, that Mr. Mayor, if you wanted to recuse yourself from the first one and then come back in for the rest of them, however you would like to proceed.
Should I excuse myself or just, maybe I should ask, do we anticipate any discussion on the first item? No, then do I need to recuse myself or just keep my mouth shut?
I think you're fine as long as there's no discussion of item one. The rest of the council members just provide your priorities, and I think we're okay on that.
Great.
All righty, who wants to go first? Mr. Duncan's already indicated. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have your list ready?
From top to bottom, 2, 2, and 2. The volunteer program, 3, and the bottom 2 are both 1s.
Big Bo?
Yeah, so chamber 2, engineering 2, performing arts 1, volunteer program 1, housing initiatives 2, biannual reporting 3.
Councilman Thorpe?
Okay, from top to bottom. 2, 1, 1, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. We're all good to go.
Just for the record, for the community's benefit, also included in the packet was an assessment or an update on the items that were prioritized last year, some of which we're still working on, some of which were completed or implemented along the way. So just an update on that. We didn't talk about it here verbally, but certainly it's in the staff report. So.
Okay, gentlemen, you're all good with this? Congratulations to all of us. We made it. We're on announcements now. Anything that they wish to announce? Talk about Thursday?
Talk about Thursday. Refresh my memory.
The Valley Elementary School.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry. I'm getting old. I'm not doing this well at all, the old thing. Mayor Avila and I attended the Nathan Tyler Davis Memorial Garden ribbon cutting. And we got to witness an elementary school where the principal is very patriotic and loves the country and is doing a fantastic job of instilling this love for country and love for our traditions as we know them in the hearts of these children. We watched a ceremony where the children, the young people, conducted the whole process, and it brought tears to my eyes. I was standing there and thinking, I'm so thankful that I am here to witness this, because in this day and age, when you hear so much criticism of the public education system, we witnessed an elementary school that was heartwarming, it was patriotic, it was amazing, and I got the privilege of watching looking at observing the garden that they have planted or put together in commemoration of this young man, and I got to tell you, it was the best thing that happened to me that week, for sure.
It was thoroughly impressive. I agree 100%. Those children, those babies, they just did a phenomenal job at running the event. Their speeches may have been helped by the teachers or parents, but they spoke eloquently. I just adored the final speaker who said we need to stop saying Happy Memorial Day and instead saying have a memorable Memorial Day. So it keeps in mind why we're actually commemorating May 31st or Memorial Day as it is. So that was great, 100%.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you?
Well, I just wanted to say that we also attended the Memorial Day celebration at Desert Lawn, and that was not as well attended this year as 2-3 years ago, but that was also a very, very good event, and we remembered the soldiers that have died in the line of duty, and it was also heartwarming and very good, very nice.
And well organized too. Very, very impressive.
Announcements for me, I wanted to bring it up tactfully and cautiously, but in light of the tragedy that took place in Texas, I think the same day I reached out to our city manager and asked that he reach out to our school district to let them know that as a city, we're talking about being prepared as we can to combat anything like that. I had great discussions with city staff today, our police department and our fire department, about moving forward with preparedness and ensuring that the city is working collaboratively with our public safety officials to ensure that we're as prepared as we can be should that tragedy, God forbid, ever happen here, and do anything we can for preventiveness as well. I got to tell you, we have a top-notch sheriff's department, a police department that is dedicated to making sure that our community is safe. They just discussed going to one of our elementary schools and seeing our babies, is what they said. And that's what we're talking about, is ensuring that our community, our city government, and our school board is doing everything we can to make sure that we remember Uvalde, we learn from it, and we take steps to do whatever we can to make sure that doesn't happen to Yucaipa. And so those conversations are being had by your local government and by your law enforcement and fire department and truly by your school board, or rather school district. So please know that that is taking place.
I agree with everything everyone said so far. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the sheriff's department, I want to thank the sheriff's department, but I also want to thank the folks that were the boots on the ground over the long weekend. I know those deputies had a stressful and very busy weekend. They're on their shifts, so thank them for us, please. And I know it's probably expected from me since I work from the sheriff's department, but it's heartfelt, and I've been there, I've done that, and some of those similar calls maybe. But anyway, we just thank them for being out there and handling those stressful situations this weekend.
All right. Thank you again. Yeah, gentlemen, that weekend was just horrendous. It was just a wild weekend. I hope it's not a symbol or a sign of things to come this summer. Okay, we do have some closed session items.
Sure.
Announce them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We've got 2 items on closed session this evening. First is conference with real property negotiator regarding the property at 31429 Yucaipa Boulevard. City's negotiators, Mr. Casey, negotiating party Vantage One Real Estate Investments, and under negotiation, price and terms of payment. The second, also real property item. It's the property at the southeast corner of Oak Glen and Avenue E. City's negotiators, Mr. Casey, negotiating parties Eagle Development and Randy Friend, under negotiation, also price and terms of payment. We do not expect reportable action on either of those items this evening.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen in the council and those who are listening via the audio. Thank you for your patience. We are now moving to closed session. The public's meeting is adjourned.